In this episode, we begin with one of the most important skills a new security analyst can develop, which is learning how to notice when network activity feels wrong even before you know exactly what caused it. Network-based indicators of malicious activity are the signs that show up in traffic patterns, communications, and connection behavior when an attacker, a compromised system, or a piece of malware is doing something it should not be doing. For beginners, this topic matters because many attacks leave traces on the network long before the full impact becomes obvious to users or leadership. A file may not yet be encrypted by ransomware, a fraud event may not yet be completed, and an account may not yet be obviously abused, but the network often starts telling part of the story early through odd destinations, unusual timing, repeated connection attempts, or behavior that simply does not match the system's normal purpose. Once you learn to recognize these patterns, security monitoring becomes much less about guessing and much more about informed observation. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. At the most basic level, a network-based indicator is any observable sign in network communication that suggests malicious activity may be occurring. That does not mean every unusual packet is automatically dangerous, and it does not mean every real attack announces itself clearly. It means the network can reveal clues about who is communicating, where traffic is going, when it happens, how much data is moving, how often the connection repeats, and whether the behavior makes sense for the device or user involved. Analysts pay attention to those clues because the network connects systems together, and many forms of malicious activity depend on communication. Attackers often need to reach a victim, move between systems, send instructions to malware, steal data, or test what resources are available. Even when the attacker tries to hide, those actions often create patterns. The challenge is learning to tell the difference between ordinary business traffic and activity that deserves investigation, because malicious behavior often hides inside what looks routine until you examine it more carefully. One of the strongest ideas for a new learner to understand is that indicators only make sense in context. A connection to a foreign country is not inherently malicious if the organization has customers, staff, or cloud services there. Large data transfers are not automatically dangerous if the company performs scheduled backups or media uploads as part of normal operations. A high number of connection attempts may be perfectly expected for a busy web application, but highly suspicious for a receptionist's desktop. That is why analysts rely so heavily on baselines, which are understood patterns of normal activity for a particular network, system, user population, or business process. Baselines help turn raw observation into useful meaning. When you know what normal looks like, abnormal activity stands out more clearly. Without that context, a beginner can easily overreact to harmless variation or overlook something important because it did not look dramatic enough. Good analysis begins with understanding expected behavior before judging unexpected behavior. Unexpected outbound communication is one of the most common network-based indicators of compromise. Many malicious programs eventually need to contact something outside the victim environment, whether to receive commands, download additional tools, confirm that an infection succeeded, or transmit stolen data. If an internal system starts communicating with an unfamiliar external address that has no clear business purpose, that behavior deserves attention. The same is true when a device that normally talks only to a small set of approved services suddenly begins reaching many unknown destinations, especially at odd hours or with a repeated pattern. Analysts also consider whether the destination is rare in the organization, whether other hosts are contacting it too, and whether the timing lines up with other suspicious events such as a phishing email, a new process launch, or a privileged login. What makes these outbound indicators valuable is that many attackers ultimately need to leave footprints beyond the local machine. The network can expose those footprints even when the malware itself is trying hard to stay quiet on the host. Another important category involves unusual use of ports and protocols. Every service on a network tends to communicate in recognizable ways, and legitimate business applications usually rely on a relatively stable set of protocols and destination patterns. When a system begins using a protocol it has never used before, or communicates over a port that makes little sense for its role, that can be an indicator of malicious activity or at least misconfiguration. For example, if a printer suddenly starts initiating connections that resemble remote administration behavior, or a user workstation begins acting like a server and accepting incoming sessions from many peers, those changes merit attention. Analysts are careful not to assume that non-standard automatically means malicious, because modern environments contain many specialized tools, updates, and integrations. Still, protocol misuse matters because attackers often try to blend into allowed traffic while accomplishing goals that do not match the normal purpose of the system. The network can reveal that mismatch through patterns of service use that look functionally out of place. A pattern called beaconing is especially important in network monitoring because it often points to malware communicating with an outside controller. Beaconing refers to repeated, regular communication from a compromised system to an external destination, often on a predictable timing pattern. The infected host may contact the remote location every few minutes, every hour, or on some other interval to check for instructions, report status, or maintain a foothold. To a beginner, this may sound subtle, but subtle is exactly why it matters. Human activity tends to vary in timing, while automated malicious communication often repeats with a mechanical rhythm that stands out once you look for it. Analysts may notice identical intervals, similar packet sizes, or repeated short connections that occur regardless of whether the user is active. Not every periodic connection is bad, because software updates, monitoring tools, and cloud applications can also behave regularly. The key is whether the pattern makes sense for the host, the application, and the organization's normal activity. Reconnaissance and scanning behavior also create important network-based indicators. Before attackers move deeper into an environment, they often try to learn what systems exist, which services are exposed, and where weak points may be found. That process can show up as connection attempts to many internal or external targets, requests across multiple ports, or systematic probing that does not resemble ordinary business communication. A single failed connection may mean nothing, but a host rapidly testing many neighboring systems can indicate discovery activity, lateral movement preparation, or automated exploitation attempts. Analysts also look for sudden increases in internal traffic between systems that do not normally interact, because attacks often involve east-west movement after the initial foothold is gained. This matters greatly in enterprise environments where one compromised endpoint can become a launching point for wider compromise. If you understand network architecture and segmentation, these indicators become even stronger because suspicious scanning across protected boundaries is often more meaningful than similar traffic inside a loosely controlled area. Data exfiltration is another major area where network-based indicators can provide early warning. Exfiltration means data leaving the organization in an unauthorized way, and it rarely appears on the network as a polite announcement that sensitive information is being stolen. Instead, analysts infer it from patterns such as unusually large outbound transfers, repeated uploads to unexpected destinations, abnormal use of cloud storage services, or traffic volume that does not match the role of the device involved. Sometimes the exfiltration is fast and obvious, but attackers often prefer slower methods that blend in with ordinary activity. They may stage data first, compress it, split it into smaller pieces, or send it out over channels already allowed by policy. That is why volume alone is not enough. Analysts compare upload behavior to the system's baseline, consider the timing, examine whether the destination is expected, and ask whether the transfer aligns with a legitimate business need. A small but repeated outbound flow to a strange destination can matter just as much as one huge suspicious upload. Domain name system, DNS. Activity is another rich source of indicators because many malicious tools rely on name resolution before they can reach their targets. The domain name system translates names into network addresses, and that ordinary function makes it attractive to attackers who want their traffic to appear routine. Analysts may watch for systems requesting suspicious or unusual domains with strange naming patterns, sudden spikes in lookup volume, or hosts generating many failed lookups for destinations no normal user or application would seek. Fast-changing infrastructure, newly observed domains, or a single endpoint reaching many rare names in a short period can also signal malicious activity. This does not mean every odd-looking domain is harmful, because modern cloud services and automated applications can generate complex names too. What matters is the larger pattern. If unusual DNS behavior lines up with new outbound connections, odd timing, and host-level anomalies, the network may be revealing the early stages of command communication, payload retrieval, or data theft through channels many users never think about. Web traffic creates its own set of indicators, especially because so much modern communication uses Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, HTTPS, which protects content from easy inspection. New learners sometimes assume that once traffic is encrypted, the network stops being useful to defenders. That is not true. Even when the content is hidden, analysts can still examine metadata such as destination patterns, timing, session frequency, certificate details, data volume, and whether the connection makes sense for the system involved. A finance workstation communicating frequently with a rare external host late at night through encrypted web sessions may deserve attention even if the exact content is unreadable. Attackers like to use web protocols because organizations depend on them, and blocking them entirely is not realistic. That makes behavior more important than simple presence. Analysts ask whether the traffic matches ordinary browsing, approved cloud services, software updates, or known applications, or whether it looks more like malware using common web channels as camouflage for something the business did not intend. Internal network behavior can be just as revealing as internet-facing traffic. Many attacks become far more serious only after the attacker begins moving laterally inside the environment, attempting to reach file shares, servers, administrative tools, or identity infrastructure. Network-based indicators of this stage may include unusual internal authentication traffic, new communication paths between user devices and server segments, bursts of connection attempts to multiple internal systems, or repeated access to administrative services from hosts that do not normally perform management tasks. A user laptop interacting aggressively with many servers is often more suspicious than a domain controller speaking widely, because the business purpose of the systems differs. Segmentation helps here because boundaries create expectations. When traffic crosses a protected boundary without a clear reason, the signal becomes stronger. For a beginner, the important lesson is that the network inside the organization is not automatically trusted just because it is internal. Many damaging attacks unfold mostly within that supposedly familiar internal space, and network indicators often reveal the movement before the business fully understands the scope. It is also important to understand that one indicator by itself is not always enough to prove malicious activity. Good analysts think in terms of accumulation, correlation, and probability rather than jumping to conclusions from a single odd event. An unusual DNS lookup, a suspicious outbound connection, a failed login, or a spike in internal scanning may each have innocent explanations in isolation. But if several of those appear together on the same host around the same time, the picture changes quickly. Correlation means connecting evidence from different sources, such as network logs, endpoint events, authentication records, asset information, and user context. A suspicious network pattern becomes far more convincing when tied to a recent phishing email, an unapproved software installation, or a privileged account being used in an unexpected way. Beginners sometimes expect malicious activity to look obvious and self-contained, but real investigations usually develop through connected clues. The network is often one of the strongest sources of those clues, but its full value appears when it is interpreted alongside other evidence. Several misconceptions can make this topic harder than it needs to be if they are not corrected early. One misconception is that malicious traffic always looks noisy, aggressive, or highly technical. In reality, some of the most dangerous network-based indicators are quiet and repetitive rather than dramatic. Another misconception is that anything unusual must be bad, which can lead to false alarms and analyst fatigue. Business environments change constantly, and legitimate new applications, updates, vendors, and user behavior can create new patterns. A third misconception is that if traffic uses encryption or a common protocol, it is probably safe. Attackers often prefer exactly those familiar channels because they blend into expected activity. The right mindset is neither blind trust nor constant panic. It is disciplined curiosity. When something does not fit the known purpose of a host, the expected timing of a workflow, or the normal communication pattern of a business unit, the analyst investigates further instead of assuming the explanation one way or the other. A useful way to tie all of this together is to imagine a workstation belonging to an employee in the accounting department. For months, that device mostly communicates with email services, shared business applications, a few internal servers, and ordinary web destinations during working hours. Then, after the employee opens a convincing attachment from a phishing email, the workstation begins making brief, encrypted connections every 10 minutes to a rare external destination, performs several unusual DNS lookups, and attempts internal connections to systems the user has never needed before. None of those signs alone absolutely proves compromise, but together they tell a much more serious story. The network is showing the likely stages of malicious activity: initial contact, automated command communication, internal discovery, and possible preparation for further movement or theft. That example reflects why network-based indicators matter so much. They help analysts recognize malicious behavior as a pattern of changing communication, not just as a single event, and that recognition can buy time to contain damage before the incident grows. By the end of this discussion, the central idea should be clear. Network-based indicators of malicious activity are the signs hidden in communication patterns that reveal when systems, users, or software are behaving in ways that do not match legitimate business purpose. Those indicators can include unexpected outbound traffic, suspicious use of ports and protocols, beaconing, scanning, internal lateral movement, unusual DNS activity, and data transfer patterns that suggest exfiltration or abuse. None of these signs should be interpreted without context, because baselines and business purpose are what turn unusual into meaningful. For a CISA Plus learner, the lasting takeaway is that the network is not just a pathway over which attacks travel. It is also one of the best places to observe them. When analysts understand what normal communication looks like, even subtle malicious behavior begins to leave traces that can be seen, questioned, and acted on before the full impact becomes impossible to ignore.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.